Yeah, because you want to as long as you update some of them within a month old already. So it took me a little while to figure out that. Yeah, then it's quite busy. I don't have that many people working with me over national project anymore.
It works!
Will you announce that the drummer is coming? He's parking. So then we'll start as soon as he comes.
Okay.
And I'm going to run upstairs and... Oh, we need a password to get on that computer.
They just got it.
They got it unlocked because it was locked and needed to be reset a second ago. Nicholas, you hear me? It was locked. We got locked out of the computer because we did it too many times.
Just now?
I thought so, yeah.
Research Lab is a powerhouse of biology-based interdisciplinary research located on the illustrious Howard University.
Thank you all. Great job. Looking at these students and training them is like looking into the future. And I've been so blessed to be able to look at the bright and brilliant future that awaits us. I mean, these students, they put that together themselves. These are their projects. They're the project managers on each of their own projects. And with the help of our collaborators, I want to mention that they have been funded by National Geographic. It's made a big impact on bolstering their confidence. They've gotten good collaborative support from each of the regional areas that they're interested in. And I think you're going to see something really good coming from them in the future as well. So please, let's give them another hand. So part of the benefit of being in this position as director of the Comp Lab is I get to meet fantastic people. And Dr. Villar, who is head of the Geographic Project, introduced Dr. Liu to me, who is the Senior Vice President of Helix. And I remember that meeting because we sat around and ate some of the cookies that Najla had brought from Saudi Arabia. And so it was a real international event. We're sitting around eating cookies and talking about how we can collaborate. And actually, Dr. Liu, I think you were the first one to say to me, why don't we do 1,000 African diaspora genome project? And when I heard of this, and I thought, wow, this is great. This is exactly what we need to be doing. So we put our resources together. We had already started collecting DNA last April, and many of you contributed your saliva samples at that time. And it took us a while to get everything organized, but your samples are in the process of being analyzed. And you have this opportunity through this open house to check and make sure that you have the correct helix number, because Helix is doing the analysis, the sequencing, but we're all collaborating together. And the whole idea is by bonding together, we uplift the level of knowledge. Right now, there's very little that is known about the reference, for a reference DNA database for African people. So we're launching into new territory, and it feels good. It feels a little scary, but it feels good too. The 1,000 African Diaspora Genome Project should ideally encompass all of the New World African populations. Not just African Americans, not just people living in the DMV, but the entirety of the African presence in the Americas. And so we are very fortunate this time to have so many of the principals with us today. And we have Mr. Johnson, who is the president and CEO of Empire Genomics, who will give us his words. Dr. Liu, who I've mentioned, who is the co-founder and senior vice president of Helix, who will be talking. And we'll take a small break. We'll have a chance to talk with some of the graduate students who are here about their projects. Oh, is it time for a rally? Oh, okay. We have gifts to give away to you. So that's what the box here with your names in it. And then Dr. Sheila Walker is going to be giving an overview of the African descended peoples of the Americas. And this is really noteworthy because there are many ways that you could design a project in order to capture African and New World African diversity. But most of the ways that have been done in the past have been very haphazard. If you could pay the money for a commercial company, then maybe you could be a part of some kind of organization or grouping that they have. But it wasn't systematic. And I'm sure that much of the diversity in New World Africans and Africans of the New World or Atlantic diaspora were left out. With Dr. Walker's guidance as a cultural anthropologist and ethnographer, we should be able to reach those far reaches of African descended populations in places like Bolivia, and Peru and Argentina, as well as south side of Chicago. And then rounding out today's program will be Dr. Villar, who is the science manager for National Geographic Project. And he has really been instrumental in not only funding us, but creating and contributing creative ideas to help us realize this project. It's a multifaceted project. And it's a project that is evolving. As we work on it, the more we work on it, the more it kind of morphs a little bit. You know, we started off thinking that last April that we could get 200 people. In fact, if we could get 200 people, that would be great. And then remember, people were lined up at Blackburn. There were 464 people that ended up contributing their saliva. We were split for days. But it was much more than we expected, you know. But now, as a consequence, we have the opportunity to build a strong bioinformatics base, to interpret the data, because just simply sequencing it is not enough. We have to make sense out of it. And we have to make sense out of it in a historical and anthropologically significant way. And so we're finding new talent here, and I'm seeing some of the people now. We collected so much saliva that we have more than what we need for just human DNA. So we also are able to assess the microbiome. And I see Dr. Robinson is here. Dr. Robinson, you want to give away or shout out? She's our resident microbiologist and supplied us with all of the huge tubes which people very, very willingly fill to the brim with their saliva. So we've got it all stored at -80 or -20 degrees centigrade. And the idea is that we'll look at the microbiome, we'll look at the human DNA. We'll be able to put all this information together. And then we can start saying some unique things about us as a people and about humans in general. So, without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Anthony Johnson. Please come on up to the front. Okay, while he's coming up, we can do this raffle. Mr. Johnson, I'll ask you to pick, so I won't be accountable.
Hanging jackets.
Yes. No Russian involvement in this.
I'm going to pronounce the last name. First name is Amber.
Amber
Roller.
Roller. You guys need to write that. Amber. Is Amber here?
Going once.
Going what? No Amber? Oh, fictitious name.
All right. Russians.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Shaolei Tang.
Oh, he's here. Let's just do more. Okay, I'll go get the kids.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go with 4 kids here. Ashley Miller. Maya Brown. And we'll do 3 or 4.
Okay.
And then we'll be talking throughout the afternoon about the kit. I think Dr. Lou and myself will be talking about the geographic kit, how it is. And Sonia Solon. We'll raffle more throughout the afternoon. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3.
So thanks for the time to come and speak with you today. This is a very exciting both project and time in the world of human genomics. So my name is Anthony Johnson. I'm the president and CEO of Empire Genomics. We're a firm that does genetic testing in the area of cancer. And today I'm here to talk about why having diversity in DNA sequencing is so important to our finding kind of cures for cancer, what are the causes of those cancers, and just having kind of just more equity within the healthcare field. And I think a large part of life is about serendipity and being prepared. So I met James Liu probably about in November this past year at a 100 Senior Genome Conference, and we got to talking about some of the things we're doing. And one of the things I was lamenting about is the fact of not having enough diversity in the research world in general, particularly in the area of genomics. And kind of one thing led to another. He told me about some of the great work that Dr. Jackson is doing here, and that's why I'm here today, basically. This all has taken place in the past probably 2 weeks or so, I would imagine. It's an honor to be here. I'm born and raised in Washington, D.C., and grew up literally probably 10 blocks down the road here on Webster Street. This is the first time coming back actually and speaking about some of the great work that we've been doing, and I've been doing in this field, so it's an honor. So let me tell you a bit about my company. We started this company back in 2007. We actually took some of the core technology from the University of Buffalo in New York State, as well as the Roswell Park Cancer Institute. And our founder is a lady by the name of Dr. Norma Nowak. She's a researcher, and she's been working steadfastly at trying to find ways to better diagnose and treat cancer. She lost her husband at the age of 32, had 2 very young kids, and the kids came to her at age 6 and 8, respectfully, and said, "Mom, if you're so smart, why couldn't you solve my dad's cancer?" And that's been her passion ever since. Yeah, it's pretty powerful. And that kind of what underlines everything we do in our company. Some of the seminal work of the Human Genome Project, which is the basis for everything we're talking about right now, actually came from Roswell Park. So the DNA that was used to sequence the human genome on the public side came out of Roswell Park. And I just found out recently, actually was an African-American male is the root of all the DNA in the Roswell Park libraries that most people use right now in their sequencing. So it's pretty amazing. And that project and the research we discovered from it is the underline of what we did to start our company. So with the knowledge of that DNA base, we're actually able to create diagnostics and new therapeutics. And just by way of kind of some of the things we do, we currently have right now 2 tests in development with a pharmaceutical firm called Takeda Millennium that are actually used to predict response to certain drugs. And one of these actual drugs is a drug called Velcade. And the discovery of this in this area called multiple myeloma, which is a blood-based cancer, it happens to affect a lot more African Americans than it does European populations, was discovered at Emory University. It was discovered in a very young African American population. So typically myeloma affects us at age 50 to about 65. And at Emory, they were finding this population of African Americans that were at 25 to 30 and having a very lethal form of this cancer. And so with that, we actually set about doing a clinical trial. And part of the genesis of what we're going to talk about today is that we're struggling to find African Americans actually participating in this trial. And so this is one of the reasons why we need more involvement of people like around this room in this area of research. So I'll talk a bit about kind of where medicine is and where it's going, right? So historically right now, we're treated because we have a symptom. So you have a fever, you're tired, you have pain, and then the doctor goes on this course of trying to figure out what is wrong with you, right? And so they have a symptom, they run some tests. While they run those tests, they give you some sort of treatment, see how that works, and then they see if it kind of alleviates some of that disease. If it doesn't, they switch your drug. And there's this whole cascade effect all along. The disease is getting more progressive, more costly, and people are getting sicker. So that's historically how things are done. I'm going to set aside. Well, we're going to talk about personalized medicine in a minute. What we do know, though, is that most drugs out there actually do not work for a lot of people in the population. Oncology is one great example in cancer that 75% of drugs out there are not very specific for the people that are using them. So chemotherapeutics, which are the large class of drugs used in oncology, they just kill cells. They kill cells indiscriminately. And so what we're looking to do as a population, meaning globally, is try to find ways that we can use people's genomics to actually better define what that disease is, and then develop targeted treatments for those actual genetic causes. So that's great, right? I mean, it's going to help a lot of people. Not so fast. So if you look at it, so the way personalized medicine will work is you would actually get yourself sequenced. You would know genetically either what you're predisposed to, what you have, and then also as you come up with actual disease, as we do better monitoring, we then look at if genetically there's a cause of that disease. Therefore, we can hopefully diagnose and treat diseases before symptoms appear or the disease exacerbates itself, like in cancer where you have most times, for instance, you're presented with kidney cancer or pancreatic cancer, it's usually too late to treat. You're at stage 4, it's very aggressive, and you have a very short life. If we can identify that much earlier and know the genetic cause of that disease, then we can actually have very prescribed treatments for that, and then therefore go into our monitoring phase and have more cures. So it's getting the right drug to the right patient at the right time. The problem is that all the work taking place right now in genomic sequencing, or in large part, is taking place in European populations, and it's not actually representative of the population that you see in this room right here. And so what scares the hell out of me, excuse my language, is that in 5 to 10 years, we're gonna have treatments out there that already they do not work for us, and these targeted treatments definitely won't work for us and for our population. And so the onus is on us, right? The onus is on us to actually take more concern for what's taking place in the research world and actually being more proactive. And so that's why I'm excited to see some of the work that's taking place in this lab. So what do we do? So my company, Empire Genomics, we actually use DNA. We grab it from a variety of samples, from urine, saliva, blood, bone marrow, and tumor tissues. And we answer one of 3 questions. We answer, can we more definitively diagnose what that cancer is? So in the future, cancer won't be just breast cancer or prostate cancer. It'll be a certain gene name. It'll be a BRAF cancer. It may be a skin cancer. It may be a pancreatic cancer, but it won't just be a cancer of a tissue of origin. We also look at then, can we come up with, from a DNA perspective, what's your prognosis? Is that going to be an aggressive cancer? Is it going to be a malignant cancer? Or is it going to be benign? And then the last thing we're trying to do, which I think is the holy grail, is to then work with pharmaceutical partners to identify specific treatments for those given cancers. So our customers are hospital systems, so we actually work with Howard University, we work with Memorial Sloan Kettering. We also work with pharmaceutical firms that are developing these actual drugs and give them genetic signatures and DNA sequencing work that helps them to better identify the patient that will respond to given treatments. Therefore, hopefully they can actually move cancer therapies through the marketplace in a much more faster manner, at a lower cost, and hopefully be much more specific for given patient populations. Why cancer? Well, we're all getting older, right? And as we get older, cancer tends to actually present itself. And it's one thing that I think indiscriminately affects most human beings, actually. And so if you look at it, there's 2 types of cancers out there right now as we classify them, either a blood-based cancer or a solid tumor-based cancer. And in the US alone, these are, from a therapeutic perspective, over $12 billion market sizes. And the fastest growing area or cost in our healthcare system are these actual specialty drugs that are being used to treat cancer. And so if we don't get a handle on this now, it's going to have much more disastrous, I guess, ramifications in the future. It's anticipated that over the next 12 years, cancer rates are going to grow by 24%. 24%, right? Can you imagine that? So we need to do something now. We need to do it kind of pretty, obviously, in a rapid manner. And then if you look at this, African Americans, Latinos, and other ethnic minorities have higher death rates, shorter survival rates, as well as, generally speaking, acquire more aggressive forms of a variety of these diseases. So the future of medicine, I think we gotta ask ourselves some key questions. Who are these drugs, these personalized medicines being developed for? Who are they personal to? If we do not have sufficient diversity, how will we find these cures, right? I think that a common misnomer is that we're all the same, right? We're 99% equal. But when we look at this rather, we need to look at it from a standpoint of certain people actually are susceptible to other cancers where other people aren't. And so what may not be a cure for you may be a cure for someone else, and the same is true on the other side. So we can learn things from European populations, they can learn from us, and collectively we'll have better cures. So the solution is more participation across the ethnic realm, and not just as trial subjects. right? Historically, we've been submitting our DNA, submitting our samples, and just being test subjects, but I think we need to we need to be involved in policymaking, we need to be involved in the funding, we need to be involved in the monitoring, the transparency, right? Who determines what diseases are going to be actually researched? We should be answering some of those questions. And then also, we should submit our DNA and participate and encourage our family members to do so as well. Wrong presentation. Well, I'll keep talking actually. So, part of the reason why I'm here is that as a company, one of the things we believe in is that education and community outreach are going to be some of the keys to reducing some of these disparities that are out there. And it's forums like these where we have these kind of open discussions that are going to allow us to actually spread that message. So my company is actually working together with others in the community to actually work on getting more minority sequenced and involved in these projects that are out there, like the 1,000 African Diaspora Project. There's another one called All of Us through the National Institutes of Health. And so one of the things we're doing is actually a documentary. So we're going through and actually sequencing African Americans, Latinos from across the Americas, if you will, in this case, US, from many different professions, with them telling their story of why they're getting themselves sequenced, what does it mean to them, and what's the experience they go through as they're actually going through this learning process. So some people are doing it from a perspective of wanting to know their ancestry. Other ones are doing it. We have a young African American female who is 16 years old. Every female in her family, she's from Alabama, has been stricken with cancer, whether it be lung, colon, breast, etc. And she has a grandmother who just had a double mastectomy. And the grandmother, these are all African Americans, said that I'm a survivor and I keep moving forward and doesn't want to tell her story. What you have now, this 16-year-old female is thinking, am I going to have that same thing happen to me? And so one of the things we're doing is actually telling that story of having the grandmother sequence as well as the 16-year-old and her father to really tell that story of what they learned throughout this process and dealing with some of those fears of what do I do if I do discover that I'm susceptible to a given cancer. So there are a variety of stories I think need to be told, and I think we need to all tell our story. And so the film is entitled Our Genome Project. We've actually sequenced the first 5 individuals. Coincidentally, 2 of them are physicians out of Harvard who happen to be from the Washington, D.C. area base, right? So it's actually pretty amazing to find out they're in my same age group base, right? We didn't know each other, but now we're involved in this exciting project. And we're going to take that film and then do a tour across the historically Black colleges and universities across the U.S. Throughout the rest of 2018 and part of 2019. And actually, in similar to what you're doing right here now, National Geographic, is to actually donate sequencing so people who want to get themselves sequenced and then in turn tell their story as well. And what we want to do is actually track some of these stories over time, because some of the stuff we're learning right now is we may be normal right now, but as we do indeed develop diseases based, right, I think it's going to be very important to go back and tell the story of being some of the pioneers that are getting ourselves sequenced and what we're learning throughout the process as technology and medicine evolves. And so I'm looking forward to hopefully working with Dr. Jackson to get some of the participants in the 1,000 Genome African Diaspora Project to participate in the film. And we're looking to get this distributed by PBS, so Public Broadcasting System. And that pretty much concludes my presentation, but I'm definitely, I want to thank Dr. Jackson and Howard University and the organizers of this event. And she has my contact details. I think that it's very exciting to see kind of what the future of research and medicine looks like. And I think that one of the things is my background is I'm a bio pre-med major. I've done research and developed drugs before, and then I transitioned into kind of the business world. So I think that also I'm looking at kind of the diaspora of what takes place in healthcare is that there are a variety of different paths we all can take, and I think we need more and more people at the table that are making some of these decisions, and I'm excited to see what's taking place here. So thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I guess we should move on to Dr. Liu's presentation because there's a continuity, unless you want to do another.
We can do it, all right, want to everybody do it now?
Okay, all right. All right, sounds good.
We'll do a few more rounds.
Yeah, go get the prices.
Okay.
Which, do you want to do DNA kits or do you want to do hats?
Those, but these DNA kits, those
Yeah,
are,
it's okay.
they have to be.
Okay.
Mix them up. Okay. Tommy? Abhijit? Sheila Walker? Have you done this before? No? Okay. Danielle? Jack Hutchins? Courtney Robinson.
So, stand right over here and take that.
So thanks for having me here. I think first I'd like to thank Dr. Jackson and Howard University for having me. And thank you to the students for sharing some of your work earlier. Actually, just wanted to note that he was hiring. So very talented students here. We're always interested in seeing you. It's a very interesting time in genetics, and it's been, kind of the last 10 years of real transformation in the field. And I think one way to really level set and understand where we've gone and where we need to go in the next couple of years is to start with this curve that's often displayed as we think about the kind of adoption of genetic sequencing. So the first human genome was completed about 2003. It took about, this chart's actually a little bit, the first one actually cost about $3.4 billion. It took 10 years to do. And actually, if you look at the cost curves here, the top line here, that's called Moore's Law. And Moore's Law is often referred to as this law in electronics where you double the power of a processor every 18 months. And that's the reason why you can carry literally a supercomputer in your phone on your person every single day. If you look at the cost of sequencing, it's basically Moore's on Moore's. Right? We've gone essentially from $3.4 billion 10 years ago to about $1,000 today. It took 10 years, and now we can do it in 24 hours. And so really the cost curves and the speed and the ability for us to really translate and perform genetic sequencing has really changed the field in dramatic ways. And I think the first thing that's really happened is there's been a broad scale move from what is an older technology called genotyping, which is, I think one way to think about it is if your genome was a book and you were choosing single letters out of it, that was what we were doing for a long period of time. And sequencing is like reading the whole book. And so we decided that reading whole books is usually more informative than just reading vowels. And so that's what we've also learned is that if you really want to understand people's genomes and how that impacts not only where you're from, but also how that impacts your health, you need to read the whole thing. And so what we've done is the field has moved wholesale to sequencing because the cost has come down. But also because of that, the amount of discovery happening here is also increasing pretty rapidly. And so the next chart on these is that the amount of peer-reviewed publications and kind of genotyping have kind of leveled off at this point, but people are really accelerating on the sequencing side. So if you think about costs coming down, more research projects happening, more discovery happening, and more insights happening, it's kind of a nice virtuous cycle. And so I think people are really starting to move toward this world where there's going to be universal access to genetic information. I think there is very much within the next 5, 10, 15 years, I think there'll be arguing about exact timelines, but I think no one disagrees now that it will be universal availability of genes. I think in the consumer space, this has really manifested itself as television commercials will do it every time you turn on TV. As of, I think right now, about 12 million people have been genotyped in the world. More than half of them were done just last year. It's basically doubling every single year. You don't think that many doubles if you're thinking about the US being genotyped or sequenced at that point, and then worldwide, I think that will be relatively soon thereafter. I mean, there are many, many products now talking about being low personal cohorts. And so what we're doing at Helix is trying to allow people to use their data however they see fit through their lifetimes. So your DNA is what you're born with. It doesn't change through your lifetime. Don't keep doing it over and over again. Just leverage it to DNA. And so the idea here is get sequenced one time and use it however you want, however through your lifetime. And so as people who are getting the Helix kits and our partner here with National Geographic is that you get sequenced once on this very broad assay. It's called the Exome Plus. It captures all the genes in your genome. And then basically we store that on your behalf at Helix, and then you can leverage it however you want, throughout whatever applications you want, and you can share it however you see fit as well. And so that typically manifests today, or people call it as the App Store of Genetics. And that allows people to do things such as Ancestry with National Geographic, we have health products with Mayo Clinic, and then we have things like personalized socks with a company in England. And so you can kind of do whatever you see fit, and it's really determined by the person. And the idea is to put the person at the center of it and let them decide how they want to make those decisions. I think what happens as you start to digitalize genomes and as we think about where it's going to be is that we do think DNA is going to be almost as commonplace as location services. So today you see this all the time on your phone, right? Like I want to use your location on your phone, you carry GPS everywhere. One day it'll be something like this. DNA will be everywhere, fully digital on demand, how you see fit as well. So a little bit about the types of things that genetics are typically used for and what we're thinking about. I think they're really, and this will transform a lot of different products. And so we have these things on our marketplace. But the idea is you can use it lots of places. And so get sequenced once, on demand, fully digital, and lower cost going forward. I think we think a lot about genetics and research and clinical, though, about a little bit about these two kind of questions, right? The first one is really kind of who are we and where do we come from? What's that story look like? And so I'll tell a little bit about what we've kind of learned in the field and where we think we're going. And the second question is, wow, this thing I happen to have, got hair, or whatever it is, I'm a little bit shorter than average, that sort of stuff, is that inherited, right? And is that a disease that's inherited? Is that a trait that's inherited? Is that something I think your mom and dad, how long ago did that happen? And I think both those stories have, really become really elucidated if you understand much more about where people are from and the diversity of where people are from. And so one of the early papers that came out in this space was done in 2008, which overlaid genetic data across Europe. And so actually what they did was they took this big database of Europeans, they transformed their data set, and they said, does that map directly on top of Europe? And that's exactly actually what they saw. It was not a sticky given, but your genetic story is actually in your DNA. It tells you exactly what parts of the region you're in, what parts of the world you're from. And so it's hard to see exactly what's on here, but essentially when they took this graph and they put it on top of Europe and rotated it, people came from those countries from which it showed. And you can see, this one's a little hard to see, but they can estimate how close to that home point you were from and within 400 kilometers of where you're expected to be from. And so there was like a real, I think, real excitement to feel that the amount of resolution you can get from the data at this point is start telling you things about, as you get more densities, where are the home villages, where are the countries, where are the regions you're truly from, and how you kind of mix across the world as well. And I think we saw a lot of that actually in the next set of studies that came out of Africa and some of the African collections. And this is very hard to see, I know. But one of the most interesting things that was reestablished at this point was that African populations have the highest genetic diversity in the world. And not just like by a little bit, but like a lot. And this is a yes. So this is Africa. And the point is, it's actually there are many, many populations here. This is the rest of the world, everywhere else, right? This is all of Asia. There's very little amount of diversity here. Europe, Central Asia, and India, right? The amount of difference between Asians and Europeans is much less than just the diversity within Africa itself. And so it really gave credence, I think, to this idea, and really reinforced the idea that basically people came out of Africa. It's not surprising. But the reason this happens is just a small proportion of the genetic diversity came out of Africa and went across the world. The rest of it remained in Africa, actually. And so also, because of the amount of genetic diversity in Africa, you also see the greatest spread of phenotypes in Africa as well. The tallest people and the shortest people are in Africa, as well as many, some of the most greatest gradations in skin pigment, as well as all a bunch of other features. And so it's real, I think, for those who are spending a lot of time in Africa, sampling Africa, it's actually an amazing treasure trove of information as well as something that I think is super interesting from a human disease as well as where you're from perspective. The other thing to know is that we actually still have a long way to go, and so I'll show this really fun thing. This is from my test from ancestry DNA, and it clearly told me I was Asian. And so it just makes a point that we're very early in our collections, right? The reference populations tend to be very European driven. The most resolution occurs in Europe. This 8% Polynesian, my mom denies. She's like, I don't know who that is. And so just something as we think about, like, it is important to participate in these things because it's going to help us tell us more about ourselves. The other thing in health, I think, in particular health, I think it's quite important is that we've been thinking a lot about the structure to discover whether or not a trait or a disease is associated with genetics. And so these typical studies are called genome-wide association studies, otherwise known as GWAS. And this is typically how it works. You have some patients who have a disease or a trait. You have some non-patients, some people who are ostensibly healthy or have not yet been diseased. You basically run a statistical association, and you see if there's basically some part of the genetics that explains that part of the trait or the disease. And this approach has been tremendously successful. There have been over 3,000 publications, over 58,000 novel associations. These are actually just the chromosomes, and every single one of these data, every single one of these colors is actually a study finding. Right? So we found a lot. It's been tremendously profitable from a scientific perspective. And these are just some of the papers that have come out since January. I just kind of typed in a filter and said GWAS in January. These are just 4 papers that showed up, but it's a regular occurrence. You're seeing these things emerging. Our learning is just growing so fast. The flip side of it is, we study who's in these populations. In 2009, 96% of the samples were Europeans. Right? 4% were non-Europeans. Last year, 2 years ago, a lot more studies, a lot more people went in, 20 times more samples, still 80% European. Right? Of this population, 75% are Asian, primarily run actually in China and Asia. They're funding those projects now. 20% are African populations, and their 5% is literally everyone else. Right? It's not very diverse. And because of that, what you see is that when you use these things to predict risk, you actually get huge variation in the ability to make predictions. And probably not surprising that all predictions are not created equal, but you actually want, so these are 5 different populations from the world, and you actually want them to line up over each other. That will tell you that they have the exact same predictive power. These are the African populations, these are Americans, these are the South Asians, these are the Europeans, East Asians, obviously they're not lining up, right? And height is actually something we all kind of understand as really, really heritable. Like, your parents are tall, you're tall, you're short, right? And so it's a little bit surprising, right, that the studies have been all kind of all over the place, or predictions a little bit all over the place, and the Europeans went pretty well, but everyone else not so well. Right? And so it's a real, I think, a real loss to the community that we can't do this better, and part of that is we just don't have the science. So I'll just make this last point before I kind of open for questions, is that we're really at the beginning of what these are kind of large-scale population cohorts that are going on. And these are some of the examples of the millions of people who will be sequenced all of these different kinds of projects. The All of Us program is a program being run here out at NIH. It used to be called the Personalized Medicine Initiative. It was actually started by Obama. And actually their mandate is to basically collect data on 1 million people in the United States, but half of them have to be non-European populations. And so I think it's a big recognition by the field that we've been missing the fact that half the population in the United States will be minority populations in the next couple of years too. And so there's really, I think, a big push for these type of programs to proceed. I think they are trying very hard to make those things successful. But it will require, as they say, all of us to be part of those kinds of things. And HELIX, for our part, are doing our part on some of these issues as well. For example, we recently announced a project with Renowned Health System, which is a rural hospital in Reno, Nevada. And they've been focused on participatory and community health. And in particular, they're interested in sequencing we announced a project for 40,000 individuals, but it's going to be 50. Nevada's primarily those not only who are ethnically diverse, so their population primarily Hispanics, but also socially and economically. So these are people who basically would never be able to buy the DNA kit. And so as part of those projects, every single one of them will receive, probably actually they're all going to get GEO. As part of their participation as well. And they will be able to combine both their genetic data as well as the medical records here to help them discover new things in populations. And I think it's just a part of telling a little bit of story, I think, where the space is going. Because if you think about the types of data that exist around you today, almost all of those are controlled by people, right? They're controlled by yourself, right? So there will be genomic data that's going to be associated with you. Your health record should be associated with you. All the tracking data that's associated on your phone is associated with you. And all the cost of those data is going to zero, right? Everything's going to zero except for iPhones, but generally acquisition costs are going to zero, right? Like the data gets captured about you every single day, all the time. And there's lots of people who are interested in like looking at that and seeing things around the discovery. So the question will be, if you want to marry these things together to really discover, people have to be at the center. That they have to agree that they understand what they're participating in, that they're consenting to, and that those things become one common depository that they can be a part of. And so I just invite everyone to start thinking about what does it mean for you to be broadly participating in research, not just one time, but longitudinally through your lifetime, so you can not only learn something about yourself, but also help broader humanity. So I think that's it for me.
Yeah, let's do some questions.
Do you see a role that you guys are able to play in possibly repurposing possible failed, some of the failed cancer drugs or other drugs from the past that maybe didn't work so well for particular reasons that we can now repurpose and use in a different way using the genomic?
Yeah, it's a good question about, I think it's broadly a question, does genomics tell you about whether or not drug use in that person or pharmaceutical use or whatever that happens to be will be helpful, right? And so Anthony actually spends much more time on this than I do, but broadly the answer is there are particular mutations that will be specific to drugs. And so as the field moves toward targeted therapies, which is decisions on therapies are based on genetic markers, like that will essentially be true. And so when we talk about personalized medicine, we're talking about how do we choose the best drug for you given your condition. That's part of a big part of what we're thinking about.
Some other questions?
Yeah. So the prices are going down. How about the turnaround time, in your opinion? It still takes a few months, a couple of weeks. Do you think we'll get to a point where you do your DNA sequence, you rub a lot of saliva, and within a day or two, how far away is that?
You know, I think it's interesting because people I think our view is that genetics is a test, right? Like you went in, you got a test done, and like there's an experience around the test. I think actually the future is not that you won't think of genetics as a test, so to speak, something that exists, right? And so, like for example, every time you've been sequenced at Helix, all your interactions after there are digital. So if you went and got, let's say, Geno today, and you went and bought like a mobile app, the time at which you get data is actually about 5 milliseconds now. It's the speed at which you turn on your location services. And so it will be fully digital on demand. And so I think people will start to shift away from the mentality like I have to wait for it. It'll just be there. Although you still have to get sequenced. It takes time.
The lab process still takes
The lab process still takes time, but I think once you've gotten past it, the friction is much less.
How long do you think it will take for this to become fully integrated into society?
Fully integrated into society. I think it will be a little fits and starts, is my guess. It'll probably be, I guess something we say internally is it's longer than we hope, but sooner than we think. And so I think it's easy to underestimate the short term or overestimate the short term, and really easy to underestimate the long term on this one. I would not be blown away if it was 100 million people in the next 10 years. It seems like a big number, I know, but if it doubles every year, we will be 100 million people. Any question back there?
Yeah. I was just wondering what kind of different strategies are being used just in general to get more people of color to get their DNA sequenced. And I know that when we talk about like medically speaking, Black people are very hesitant in particular to get involved in these kinds of things. And I start thinking about like film gags, I don't know if you've seen that with DNA sequence. Like his people to get jobs and different things like that. So like what kind of ways, and if I'm talking to my family and I'm saying, hey, you guys should get your DNA sequence, like what kind of ways should I talk to them places can I tell them to go, different things like that.
It's a fair comment, because I think it is fairly new, right, and it's a new concept. There's a lot of, I think, historical bias towards doing things like that. I think one thing is, I think one of the key things is who controls what you do, right? Like, do we give people the choice, or do we make choices for them? And I think one of the things we try to make very clear is that customers get to choose. And so actually, when you get sequenced at Helix doesn't look at it. You only, and only the portion of the data required for just that product gets transferred only. So the rest of the data is like unlock and key, essentially. And so you decide as you go what you want. If you decide that, or if you decide that, that's totally up to you. And so it's really a concept that you allow sharing, not necessarily that it's broadly shared without your consent. So I think that's one of the key concepts we have. The second one, I think, regarding the medical system and kind of health disparities, is that I think it is a little bit about, earning trust. And so I think it is having the conversations about, how do we get people engaged, what are their concerns, and how do we address those appropriately. Number one.
I get sequenced.
Yeah.
How can I know what it means? I'm just a regular person.
Sure.
And this is all done in some language I probably don't understand very easily.
Yeah.
So how can I understand the implications?
Yeah. So I think partly, I think there's two parts to that question. The first one is actually, I think there's a realization that people actually don't have genetics questions. People actually have questions. I think they hope that genetics helps them answer. And so when you think about genealogy is really a question of who am I? Genetics helps me answer that question. When you think about carrier screening, it's really how can I have a healthy family? It's not really about what autosomal recessive diseases do I have. When you think about preventive health and actual medical genetics, it's really about how do I stay healthy longer, not about do I have a mutation for cardiovascular disease. So I think the first thing is to realize that people, they don't care about the technology, they really care about how do they live better lives. And so how do you focus your language and everything to make sure they understand what they're getting into, but also say what address really the real concerns and the real benefits as well. So some things like very practical things we do is we all use like plain text language. We have lots of other things that we do to make sure it's super clear. But the idea actually is that we actually focus on just this layer of sequencing because we think we're the world's best at it. We actually partner in interpretations where we think are the world's best content partners, because content and contextualization is what makes it useful. And so, like in our case with National Geographic, we're not the best at telling a story. National Geographic is the best at telling a story. When you think about health, we have a partnership with Mount Sinai. They're going to be best at talking about the health aspects where they're playing. And so we don't actually go into that space. We actually focus on who are the best people to talk about that, and we will help them do that by offering great technology. Does that help answer the question?
Do you keep all the data private in your company and do your own computational research, or do you share it in any public way with the other research?
Research community.
Institutions? Yeah.
So Helix does not do anything beyond QC internally. But Helix does partner with individual level consent with individuals if they want to share their data with researchers. So in this case, with the 1,000 African Diaspora Project, people are individually consenting to say, I want to be part of that. And because of that individual consent, they are saying, we're okay sharing that, so we're saying that's okay. But we don't do anything without consent.
You may wonder, why would we want to use companies outside of Howard University to sequence? It's because we don't have a sequencer. And we have tried to purchase a sequencer, but we don't have the money yet. So the technology is moving so quickly, it makes sense to partner with people who are doing this for their bread and butter, and with whom you can just establish a level of trust, so that we're continuing to move forward. And at some point, we'll have a sequencer. I envision that we'll always be communicating with companies like Helix or Empire Genomics, because the technology is moving so quickly. And we're researchers. We're not clinicians, we're researchers. And so we are on the strongest base when we have connections with other units and when we're collaborating with others. And the group is stronger than the individual.
I think internally, we think we just need to dive at accuracy and quality of our sequencing. We run the world's largest clinical sequencing lab. It's fully automated, robotic. genetics, you just would not expect the university to actually make those investments. But we can because we spread it across the full ecosystem. And so we're happy to work with partners who are focused on answering great research questions. And I think Dr. Jackson really wants to run a manufacturing center, but I know she'd
Not
like to
today. Yeah. But the question that was brought up, or the point that was brought up by the young lady in the back about the hesitancy of many African Americans, so legitimate hesitancy to engage ourselves in scientific research because we've usually been the victims of scientific research, and not just with Tuskegee, but going back even to slavery and clear evidence of the abuse of regularized abuse of enslaved persons for the purposes of medical advancement. It was not beneficial to them at all, you know, but these were our ancestors, so that's the legacy. But to counter that, we have Howard University, and we have an institution that is supposed to be dedicated to the advancement of African descended peoples in particular, and the advancement of humanity in general. So on that note, you know, the train is coming. We want to make sure that we're able to benefit from the new advances and not be left behind, and no longer be victimized by being fully participant in all aspects of the research. And so that's what this effort and the 1,000 African Diaspora Genome Project effort is, an effort to be completely engaged. In fact, I'm looking at Dr. Georgia Dunstan. Dr. Dunstan, you want to raise your hand? Dr. Dunstan is she's my senior. She's a person who really brought the modern genetics to Howard University. And she's the founding director of the National Human Genome Center, which is located here at Howard University. And under her guidance, you know, Howard University really got engaged in the very beginnings of genomic research. And you remember in 1994, we wrote an African American manifesto on genomics. And what we said essentially, we want to be involved in all aspects of the research, not just be subject matter. You know, not just be targets for someone's study. We want to be, because we want to benefit from all aspects. And this is just a kind of culmination of that quite a few years later. Sometimes good things take time, but you know, the technology is rising, our own efforts and our communication, our understanding of genomics is rising. And again, building on the foundation that people like Dr. Dunstan and others laid here at Howard University. And we feel that if we don't do it, we'll do it. This is our time. And we're fortunate to have partners that will help fund and partner with us in getting the information out and generating new information so that we can do a higher quality research here. And also the clinical applications. I mean, Nicholas is a second year medical student. That generation of physicians that's coming up, they're going to need to, if they want to give service to us and our progeny, they have to understand it. So we have to provide them with that genetic foundation. Gosh, we could be preachers. Just rubber around. Yeah, second job.
Question, when you guys are partnering with institutions or anyone, is it typically them proposing a project to you, or is it typically do you guys have a team that are seeking out projects that they could possibly
This particular case is pretty unique in that I think Miguel, they've had a scientific sampling project, I think, in National Geographic in the past that we have not participated in historically. And then this was one of the early opportunities. And then it's actually just it's a pet peeve of mine that the field does not move fast enough. And so I think in this case, we had a real nice meeting of the minds, and so it came together. But it's not, I think we were primarily focused on projects where we think can advance the field in big ways. And we're not typically doing like, hey, I have sequences here or there. It's not what we're doing. We are thinking like, where can we make big bets that make
we were looking for a company we could trust. We really were, weren't we? And we were balancing a couple of different companies. And Dr. Villar is trained as I'm trained, so, you know, some of his mentors are colleagues of mine, so we bonded immediately, and we said, who can we trust? And, you know, that's why it took a little bit of time for us to finally find somebody we felt we could trust. It's all very Paleolithic, you know? It's all very, like if I see you and I like you and I think I can trust you, then okay, we can step forward, you know? So it's very much as if we're back in the Paleolithic here, but I feel comfortable with that, you know? That's just how, I'm a human, so that's how I work. I didn't ask him for his firstborn.
Yeah, I think we're gonna run to the break, but I'll be around, so feel free to come and find me if you have any questions.
Yeah, ask one question in terms of the benefits of participating in this project. Since you already indicated that NIH is all of the costs, certainly, we did collect quite a diverse resource there. And just for thinking purposes, what might be some reasons why we might be
To be this.
because NIH is actually
Right.
quite a push for the same kind of diversity.
Right. And there are, you know, there's NIH, there's the other commercial companies like 23andMe and so forth. But they are doing probability sampling at best. We're doing model-based sampling. And so I have to be careful because my husband's in the back and he's an epidemiologist. He understands this better than I do. But with model-based sampling, we already have an idea of where the African descended people are located. We already have an understanding of our people's diverse history, you know? So we're building on that foundation rather than trying to get a huge sample and hope that we've captured the magnitude of diversity that exists. We're actually, this is targeted sampling. So we're saying we definitely need to test people like the Gullah. We definitely need to test the Lumbee. We need to test specific populations, and we need to go to those places where the African descendants are located and get the DNA from them. And if it means from the Caribbean Students Association and if they've got a contemporary representative here of the Garifuna, that's fine. If we have to go to the Garifuna, okay, then we'll do that. And again, that's, you know, with the National Geographic connection, National Geographic is also an expert in finding these populations. So ours is much more designed rather than, let's search for the word, I don't want to say haphazard or random.
For all comers.
It's all comers, right. So 23andMe is all comers. But when you actually look at the African Americans who have participated in 23andMe, they tend to have more European admixture than the average population of African Americans. Now, I don't understand the reason for that. Maybe there's something socioeconomic going on, or I don't know, I don't understand it. But we hope to skirt that issue by having a design project. We also have experts in geographical information systems, so that geographically we can well characterize the individuals in the sample. Those of you who participated in the April sample, you know, we had a questionnaire for you, and we asked all kinds of things about health and ancestry and so forth. So we're trying to build a database, and we have a group of computational scientists here who are very interested in working with the results coming out of HELIX, so that this database can be directly used by Howard University researchers and other researchers in order to improve the research capacity and clinical application of the genomic data. So that would be the rationale for getting into this project as opposed to some other project. But you know, you have so much DNA. You get into both projects. We're constantly sharing DNA. It's all over the lecture here.
It's true.
Well, shall we go on a break? And you'll have a chance to talk to some of the graduate students who you were introduced to by the video. And then we'll come back, and let's take 5 minutes, then come back for Dr. Walker's presentation. She's got a very dynamic presentation for us. She's gonna take us to Ecuador and Bolivia. All kinds of exciting things.
I do a couple more of these.
Oh, yeah, we can do it around.
We'll do 4 more rounds.
You ever charge your
Sorry.
Walker is Executive Director of Afro Diaspora.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with all of you, and I think this is a very exciting project. I'm really honored to be part of it. So, my role is to share with you all of the African descendants of the Atlantic world, which will be impossible. But I got really enthusiastic, so my presentation is too long, but I'll just start. So, I've been to, I'm still missing 2 countries in the Americas and a few Caribbean islands, but not many. And at one point I lose my mind periodically, and once I went snow camping. I don't have to do that again. But once I created a project with a group of Spanish-speaking Afro-South Americans, and it was with people from all the Spanish-speaking countries in South America, whether they exist or not. There are some groups that, according to the governments, don't exist. Afro-Argentinians, clearly, they don't exist, so we had to include them. Afro-Bolivians don't exist, Afro-Chileans don't exist, certainly there are no Afro-Paraguayans, so I included all of them in spite of their non-existence. And I'm going to try to show you who some of those non-existent folks, and some who exist. So, I love my map. This is my map of the world. This is how I see the world, and this is Joseph Harris's map. He taught in the history department here, and he's really the pioneer of African diaspora studies. He did a book called Global Dimensions of the African Diaspora. This map is from 1980, and once he did the map, he began to do lectures about it, and I kind of followed him around like a puppy, just watching him talk about this map with all these arrows going so many places from Africa, and I was very curious. They go a lot of places, right? And so I accuse him of keeping me tired and poor because he's an historian. He can just go to the archives. I'm an anthropologist. I have to follow these maps and go to these places and find out who lives there and what they're doing. So I haven't followed all of them, but I have followed a good number. This, I think, is a really important element of data. Who's the basic population of the Americas? So that's the population base of the Americas. During the first 300 years of the 500 and some year history of the modern Americas, almost everyone who came to the Americas came from Africa, not from Europe. Yet we've been given the impression that the Americas are a European project. Well, given that most of the people who were here were not European, that's pretty illogical. You can't know the history of the Americas unless you know the African history of the Americas. And there is no country in the Americas that doesn't have an African descendant population. So that's how many people had survived the trip to the Americas, or trips to the Americas by the end of the 19th century. And we've grown to over 200 million people. The majority of African descendants are Brazilian, so the first language of the African diaspora is Portuguese. We think of the center of the world, but that's not quite accurate. And Brazil, with its more than 120 million self-declared African descendants in a place with no one-drop rule. 54% of the population is of African origin. So Brazil is the second largest African country after Nigeria. The first African country of the Americas. Sorry. So the absence of the one-drop rule means that one of the recent presidents, Henrique Cardoso, said that they had wonderful expressions in Brazil, that he had one foot in the kitchen. Another way of saying it is one foot in the slave quarters, to talk about the African descendants of a person who gets white skin privilege. Can't do that here. So is it possible to turn on some of these lights? I think you'll see this. I want to start with Panama. And the other ones too. Well, while you're all figuring out the lights out, so I like to start with Panama. Why? First, Panama's very manageable. It's not huge. You can drive from one end to the other in any day. It also has amazing profundity of African phenomena that generally are not acknowledged. Like, and it's also significant that it was one of the major points of entry of Africans in the Americas. Nombre de Dios and Puerto Bello around there, and Cartagena were the major ports of entry in this area of the Americas. And people would involuntarily cross the isthmus and be distributed up the Pacific coast and down the Pacific coast. So that's how all the African descendants all along the Pacific coast, starting there in Mexico, around Acapulco, that's how they got there, via Panama. So, I love this map. So this is a map of African place names in Panama, which is pretty extraordinary. There are Congos all over the place, Mandingas, Saavedra, Senegal, Karabali, lots of African place names. And the colleague who I'm doing research in Panama and I, we've gone to a lot of those places, and we haven't gone to any in which the people who live there have known the significance of the name of where they live. Malambo, Congo. There are places called El Congo, for example. When you ask people who live in El Congo, why is it called El Congo? They say, because there were lots of Congos. And when you say, who were they? They say, they were wasps. That kind of wasp. You can go to La Guinea. You can go to La Guinea in a lot of parts of Panama. And when you ask why is it called La Guinea, they say because there were a lot of Guineos, bananas. This is on the highway between Panama City and the other side of the isthmus, Ocampo. Mandinga. Why is it called Mandinga? Must have been an Indian chief. African never comes up. These are Congos, so this is the major. So those are actually a Congo queen and king. Queens are more important than the kings, and they're dancing in front of the church of Cristo Negro de Portugal. He was one of the Black Christs of the Americas. So, Mexico. On the Caribbean coast, sorry, I'm not certain these things. On the Caribbean coast of Mexico, there's Veracruz, the other major point of entry in the Caribbean from enslaved Africans. And if you go to Veracruz, and you drive down the road, you might see Mocambo, same Mocambo you just saw in Panama. And you might see Mandinga, same Mandinga you just saw in Panama. And you could go to Mandinga, here. And the person who made this place significant to me, Judith Carney, wrote a book called Black Rice. She said she was driving down the road, saw Mandinga. She had worked with Mandinga people in the Senegambia who cultivated rice. What did she find used to be the major crop in Mandinga in Mexico? Rice. African rice, and a rice domesticated in Africa. What is the Labarima is an African rice. It was domesticated about 3,000 years ago in Mali, but what was Mali? Mali was what the Mandinga Empire. So, we're doing rice in Suriname. The Garifuna people. So Central America has a lot of interesting cultural phenomena. The Garifuna are unusual in the Americas. Their story is that a boat, slave ship, shipwrecked off St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the Eastern Caribbean, and some of the people survived and interbred with the local indigenous population. As a result of which there were two populations that were called by some, the red Caribs and the black Caribs. So the Garifuna are the black Caribs. And they were fine until the British came. The British wanted to take over. There was a war that the Garifuna lost. and were exiled to Roatan Island of Honduras and made their way to the mainland and are now concentrated in Honduras, Nicaragua, a few in Nicaragua, quite a few in Belize, and one in population in Guatemala. And one of the distinctive characteristics they have is that they have a language which they tend to characterize as a Carib language. It's very difficult to look at these pretty unmiscegenated looking Garifuna whose word for human being is Mutu and think, it sounds very Carib to me. Mutu, Bantu, okay. But they have a real sense of ancestry, and in Honduras and Belize they have their major ceremonial act is Settlement Day, which is acknowledging when their ancestors arrived from Uruguay, St. Vincent. This is their hero, culture hero, Satuye, who was the leader of their fight against the British. He's on Roatan Island. So this is. This is the one so there's not going to be a lot of ancestors on time. It's impossible to look at that dance form and think of Native Americans as opposed to Central Africans. So, South America. A quick tour around South America. There's no country in the Americas without African descendants, without organized groups of African descendants. And the majority of African descendants, the greatest cultural diversity among African descendants is in South America. So, having been to Panama, I think it's good to go to Colombia. Colombia and Panama used to be the same until 1903. Used to be one country until 1903 when the United States engineered the division of the two so that it could have the ability to create the Panama Canal and essentially become the ruler of Panama. Here we are in Colombia, another Mandinga. And this is on the Pacific coast of Colombia, in the province of Choco, that has about 98% Afro-Colombian population. Very little miscegenation. You get out of the plane and you wonder, are you in Cotonou or Douala? I was in La Boquilla and I was just looking at a map, and what did I find? I found Mozambique, one Congo, Malambo, and I could have found Angola. I didn't find it on the map, but this is a yam festival. And I noticed that one of the stands was called Angola, a yam festival, celebrating the yam harvest.
La bandera se llama Angola porque son tierras palenqueras que pertenecen a la comunidad de Palenque. Y Palenque es descendiente de la alianza y bastante se llevó la Angola cuando va a ser.
I expected that he would, when I asked why this is called Angola, I didn't know if he was going to tell me it was a bee or a wasp or a fish, and he shocked me by saying it's called Angola because it was a Palenque Maroon community, and many of our ancestors came from Angola. He's the only person I encountered who told me anything like that about a place name. So these are the place names that I found right around where I was, on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. This is without looking hard. So you have West African names, Mandinga, La Mandinga, Cerros de Mandinga, Mandinga Hills, Guinea, Carabali, Calabar, Nigeria, Mozambique. So people were there from the east coast of Africa, Mozambique, West Central Africa, of course, what we know now is about 45% of Africans who arrived in the Americas, all the Americas, Chile and Canada, were from West Central Africa, the area of the Congo Kingdom. So it's not shocking that you have so many names that are either names of places, Angola, Congo, names of places in Angola and Congo, La Bonga, Malombo. And at this festival, this yam feast, there were 3 African names, and Angola, Mandinga, Samba. If you go to the area of Cali, a major city on Colombia's southern and western coast, these are family names. These are from the 2006 phone book, back when there were phone books. There's Mandinga again. So what that tells you is which African people found themselves in the area. So most of these are ethnic names. I got interested in this when I stayed with a family in Santander, a huge town named Mina, and it was a place that people looked like they could have been from West Africa. And I asked, do you have any African culture? No, everything is pure Castilian. But when I heard Mina used in Togo referring to an ethnic group, and why Mina? Because miners. So the Portuguese and the Spaniards, when they found the gold of the indigenous people, they didn't know how to extract it. And so they brought people from what they call the coast of mines, that was about Mina, Gold Coast, Ghana. So a reason for which many African descendants in Ecuador, Colombia are called Mina is their ancestors were brought because of their technological knowledge. I think we are not taught that the first transfer of technology between the old world and the new world was African technology. So all these names tell you exactly where people came from. Ecuador, another place where there's an amazing concentration of Africanity. This film is from this painting is from 1599, and it's called Mulattoes of Esmeraldas. It should be called Salvos of Esmeraldas because they're Afro-Indigenous, and there's a story of Esmeraldas that yet another slave ship wreck story. A slave ship wrecked on Esmeraldas, and Africans managed to get, 23 Africans managed to get to land. They also integrated with the local people, and Alonso de Yestas, who was a Latino, so he was already Christianized, spoke Spanish, and managed, of course, to marry the indigenous chief's daughter and become the head honcho in the place. So, Negros Minas, mining Negros. This is a river in Ecuador, and a place called Playa de Oro, Gold Beach, where people continue to pan gold in the river. And they find gold. They don't find it in huge quantities, but they find it. And with it, they make things like these earrings. I thought they were, when I saw them, I asked the woman, are these from Senegal? She said, oh no, the gold is from right near Playa de Oro. And the earrings were made in the neighborhood, in the next major area. So where would they have come from? Gold Coast, not the people, but their ancestors would have been Negros Minas from Gold Coast. My intention was to have maps to tell us exactly where we are. So now we're right south of Colombia and Ecuador, where the culture is very, we're slightly inland. Bolivia.
Estábamos como ocultos, no estábamos mostrando nuestra identidad. Pero ahora estamos muy visibilizados ya, en cambio estamos reconocidos por la nueva Comisión Política del Estado, entonces estamos incluidos en lo que es Bolivia.
We don't tend to think about Afro-Bolivians. They're not a huge population, but they are there and they are culturally distinct. My favorite Afro-Bolivian when I met him said, I'm Juan Angola Maconde from Brazil. We don't have any African culture. I said, Angola Maconde, you made up the name? He said, no, there were lots of Angolas, lots of Macondes. Oh, sorry, I don't know why I have to say that up each time. Okay, now we're in Paraguay. In the southern cone of South America, Afro-Paraguayans don't exist, but that's by then I'll show you some anyway. And the distinctive characteristic of the Afro-Paraguayans is that they have an African ethnic name, Kamba. what I was initially told was that it was a Guarani term that meant black people. And it may have become a Guarani term that means black people, but I didn't think that sounded, I don't speak any Guarani, but come on. And Paraguay is bilingual, they speak Spanish and Guarani. However, right down the road to Puente Noir in the Republic of Congo, there's an ethnic group called Bakamba. And in Angola, Kamba means my best friend in the three major languages, Ubuntu, Kimbundu, and Kikongo. So I suspect that this Kamba is not what I mean. And here are some Kambas. And their patron saint is Saint Balthasar, for the three kings. He's the African among the three kings. And that's relatively common. In Bolivia, the patron saint is Saint Benedict Gomor, who's the patron saint of Palermo in Italy, whose parents are said to have come from Ethiopia. Another place where black folks don't exist is Argentina. He looks very existent to me. And this is a group called Misibamba. If you think of Argentina, you probably think of a dance called tango. So, this country with no black folks never has, except in the beginning of the 1800s, about 40% of the population of Buenos Aires was African and Afro-descendant. If they had no African population, why would their dance have a Central African name like tango? Well, I keep giving you the same back, that was my intention. So here we are in Uruguay, right next to Argentina, right next to Paraguay. And this is a ceremony, this is a reenactment of a ceremony for the kings and queens of Congo. The Americans, in spite of slavery, African descendants perpetuated communities of royal traditions from the kingdom of Congo. Now that all looks very dignified. Part of this reenactment of the ceremony is a pretty straight procession, and then the drums get hot, and the music changes, and the dance style changes. Why Congo? Why is Congo so important in the Americas? Well, there's 45% of Africans who came in voluntarily to the Americas, but the Kingdom of Congo was the African Christian kingdom in the Americas for 300 years. The Portuguese Christianized the Kingdom of Congo in 1491. And so the Kingdom on the Hill, Mansa Congo, the Portuguese characterized it as modern as Évora, the second city after Lisbon in Portugal. And these engravings of the Kingdom of Congo, this is because Europeans thought it was a pretty fancy place. And the area that the Kingdom of Congo covered was, I think, the size of France and Belgium together. It was from middle of Angola, the two Congos, part of the two Congos, and Gabon. This man, Antonio Manuel, went to Italy to have an audience with the Pope, 1629. Unfortunately, he died, but the Pope gave him his last rites. And this bust of him is in the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome. So during the era of the importance of the Kingdom of Congo, Congo had ambassadors to Europe, to the Americas, and European painters painted them. So they were obviously people of esteem in international context. So he's the helper of the previous Don Manuel, who was an ambassador. Another helper, Don Miguel, Congo ambassador in Recife in Brazil. The Congo ambassador in Recife in Brazil. You don't get painted if you're not somebody important. So that it's because of the importance of the Kingdom of Congo in the Atlantic world. It's because of the number of people from the Kingdom of Congo who wound up in the Americas involuntarily that Congo is the African word most found in the Americas, and it applies to many different things. In Panama, it designates an ant that's the ant that bites the hardest. It indicates the wasp that stings the hardest. It designates the hottest pepper, ají Congo. So this is another royal from the area of the Congo. It's Queen Zinga, who's the national hero of Angola. You wouldn't expect to find her in the Americas, but you do. I visited this Queen Agenda in Rio Grande do Sul, part of Brazil that said they have no black folks, but they do. They're there. And they have phenomenon. One of the interesting things that happened in the Americas is the meeting of Africans with Africans. And so she is an Angolan queen, Angola, the king of Angola. But the phenomenon of which she's a part is called Mozambique. So that refers to that meeting of Africans and Africans that never happened in Africa, but happened in the Americas. Well, I thought my map was going to be different. Now, this is somebody who really doesn't exist. I just had to put her in here. She's from Chile. They were the last Afro-South Americans I met were Afro-Chileans. And Afro-South Americans have been getting themselves organized and have been doing what they call, cultural rescue since the 90s. But the Chileans weren't yet in the process. And I would ask leaders from the southern part of South America, are there Afro-Chileans? Oh, there must be. Well, that's not a good answer for me. I want a name, I want a phone number or something. So, I'm not going to show you all this, but I just had to show you that these folks do exist.
Condiciones que en un momento dado se le impone a la población de ahí a modo de blanquear de Chile y Italia. Prohibieron costumbres y tradiciones.
So what you're saying is that to Chileanize the Afro population that exists, especially in the north of Chile, they prohibited their cultural phenomena. They have a May 5th celebration, Cruz de Mayo, that was prohibited. The carnival was prohibited. Now they have reinstituted all of that, and the Oro Negro is one of the most dynamic Afro-South American groups, the Afro-Chileans. So now Brazil. There's many different Afro phenomena. So once again, the whole world culture. In Ouro Preto, the second rich town in the Americas, versus Potosí in Bolivia. Potosí had silver and black folks. Ouro Preto, black gold, had gold. And I love this sentence. The presence of negros minas in gold mines brought an almost magical luck or technological expertise. And there is a story about King Chico, who was enslaved. He was from Central Africa, logically. And his people, knowing that he was their king, bought his freedom. He bought a gold mine that was presumably empty, but it wasn't. He got rich and freed his people, and is considered to be the father of a phenomenon in central Brazil called Congada. So there's King Chico. Chico from Francisco. So this is a Congada group in Belo Horizonte, capital state of Minas Gerais, and it's a procession of the King of Congo. And other Africans come to get blessings from that. For example, you will see a Mozambique asking blessings from the Congo Queen and King. Asking for blessings.
Meu amigo, companheiro, aqui hoje nesse dia, eu peço primeiro. O senhor é meu patrão, hoje pode me mandar. O que Deus
today, you can give me words today. So there's an interesting relationship there between the Congos and Mozambique. And this is a characteristic Congada rhythm. This is Afro-Catholicism. But, let's see, the patron saint is Our Lady of the Rosary, who is Mediterranean. But with her come two African saints. This is another part of the state of Minas Gerais, another king of Congo. And their procession. So this is happening all over the state of Minas Gerais, state of São Paulo. This is a Mozambique kingdom with a Congo queen, and inside the chapel there are saints who are, Saint Benedict, the Lord, is in there, Saint Ephigenia from the Ethiopian Coptic Church, the patron saint of Brazil, Nossa Senhora de Aparecida, Our Lady of Aparecida, who is a black saint, and they try to explain their way. He is singing in a language he doesn't know. He's singing about Our Lady of the Rosary. And I said, what are you singing in? He said, well, I don't know, maybe something like Benguela. Benguela is not a language, it's a major port of leaving of Africa in southern Angola. And he uses Bantu terms that anybody who knows 3 or 4 Bantu terms will understand, like ngoma, drum, music, dance. So this is their chapel, and there is Saint Benedict and Saint Ephigenia. Brazil, being huge and having so many African descendants, has lots of different kinds of Afro phenomena. This is what we know best. The Orisha tradition from Nigeria and Benin.
In Salvador, the capital of Brazil's African divinities characterize the city's cultural and spiritual life.
We should leave out the United States. We are the United States. So, South Carolina, first state to secede from the Union, got rich on African rice, or which was the first food crop traded in the Atlantic world. And, oh, whoops, there's a slide missing. The slide that I was going to show you is one of those announcements saying there was an arrival of rice Negroes. And the gender issue with rice Negroes was males prepared the land, women owned the seeds, women planted, women harvested, and women prepared. So then, to end, I wanted to say something about some Congos I know well. The Congo on the bottom, this is the first U.S. Census, 1790, and I think he's my great-great-great-great-grandfather. Okay. Maria Congo, that was my great-great-great-grandmother. And on the bottom, Amelia, who's 9/12 years old, was my great-great-grandmother. And I was surprised to find all this. I talked to my oldest great aunt, or last great aunt. I asked her what her mother's name was, what her mother's father's name was. That was my key. Without having that bit of data, I couldn't find this. And then I went to the U.S. archives, and I'm an historian, so I don't think about the stuff that we shouldn't expect to find. So I went looking for my great-great-grandfather, Noah Congo, and man, I found him very easily, in about a half hour or so. I did what I wasn't supposed to do. I wasn't supposed to look at anything before the 1790 census because we weren't people. So why did I find these Congos so easily? It goes back to that first slide, they were free. This is Delaware, small state. By the 1800s, most African descendants in Delaware were free. And I have a lot of cousins named Congo. And so I'm doing that research. And something happened that gave me goose pimples. I went to this little church in Glasgow, Delaware, that I call a Congo church. The pastor is from the Congo, there's a graveyard full of Congos, and on one occasion I went there, and Pearl Congo came with her singing group, and they started to sing a song. And fortunately, I just had a little camera, but this is what happened. So, here's the church.
I am Bishop Herman Congo, of the St. Thomas AUM Church. Somebody's calling my name. Somebody's calling my
I was amazed that they sang somebody's calling.
Somebody's calling my name. Oh, my Lord. Somebody calling my name. Like Jesus. Somebody calling my name. Oh my Lord, oh my Lord, shall I do what shall
In addition to asking what my great-great-grandfather's name was, I stole my great-aunt's photos. So that's what you see. Those photos are from about 1880, and they're tintypes. So, thank you very much.
Wow, what a great presentation. That's why this sample, this 1,000 African Diversity Genome Project can soar above the other projects because we have this information. This is the basis for the model-based sample. And you're a part of that. Your story too can be included. Thank you so much. Great. Dr. Villar, will you please come up, and I think we should do another round?
Yeah, we'll
And
do
then I want to ask you to talk about National Geographic. Okay, very good.
But you want to do rep or later?
Okay, how about that? This is more bad,
It's a card.
Okay. Can you pour out of here, dude?
What?
That's my password. I want you to pull it forward. Oh, just that third.
Can I get over this money?
Yeah, you can test it, right?
Oh, Bola is Gilris Curtin.
Kirby?
Jamie Triplin.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Okay, just before we get started, I want to remind you, if you have received the gift of a genographic genome toolkit, we need the helix number that's on there. So please give that to Tidy, she's in the front. And make sure that she has your name and the number.
Okay, I'll get started in, I'll say thank you to Dr. Jackson and Howard University for hosting this today. I've been in communications and collaborating with Dr. Jackson for almost about a year now. And I work for National Geographic. My name is Dr. Villar. I'm the scientific lead for the Genographic project. I work closely with Dr. Lou as well from Helix, who is our partner, lab partner who runs the kit. And I've had the pleasure also, and I was so excited when I saw all the grad student videos, because these are people that early last year I met and I encouraged to apply for grants in Gretchen, the one doing the work in St. Helens Island, and Carter, who's here somewhere.
Yeah, just like
Two grants that came through me, and I helped them prepare it, and they got funded. And there's others that are on the way as well. So it's kind of neat to see those projects take off. And the people that I met through Dr. Jackson, and I would like to, I feel proud of sort of the kind of ones that I encouraged to apply, and then they funded, and I think they're amazing projects. I'm glad to see how it all turned out, as well as the new ones that are kind of are coming now. So again, my name is Miguel Villar. I am a senior program officer and also lead scientist for the Geographic Project at National Geographic. And this idea sort of began about a year ago, more than a year ago, speaking with Dr. Jackson about sort of the need to sort of understand more about African history, especially in the Americas, and how genetics can help answer that question. And like Dr. Lou said, for National Geographic, we're very interested in sort of supporting science and then telling the story of science. And I think the story of African diaspora, especially in the Americas, and we work from Canada down to Chile, is one that we don't know that much about. And I feel very proud to think that with the technology of genetics, we can really tell something that couldn't be told before, because what people carry in them is, in a sense, a story. And we just need to uncode it or decode it to really understand, to be able to tell the story by looking at the DNA, is what I'm getting at. And I'm happy to be a part of this. Anyway, let's see if I'm pushing forward. There we go. So the Geographic Project is a multi-year research initiative that uses genetic and computational technology to analyze historical global patterns in DNA. It's an educational initiative, it's a research initiative. We also support, through Geographic, through the self-kits, we support grants and programs from the society, but also grants in universities to students and journalists and photographers and all kinds of different people that can help us tell a story of science. And I see it as a way to advance anthropology and science in general. It's got sort of scientific endeavor. It's also, I mentioned a supportive grant. We've given over $2 million in grants through the Geographic Project. And it's also a way to bring science to people through the purchase of all these kits. Or, in the case of the 20 lucky people so far who've gotten kits, now you sort of test your own DNA and be a part of the project. And we're approaching 1 million different people who have participated in the 12 years of the project. It used to be that we did it through cheek swabs, now we're doing it through spit tubes. And here's a picture of the kit that you see kind of go around the room today. Like I said, we support various different projects. Some of it is research in lab, and some of it is research in the field. And this is me actually conducting research in Micronesia, at the island of Guam, where I do some geographic work on the small islands in the Western Pacific. Like I said, we've awarded lots of grants to the Geographic Project. Some are research and some are for linguistic and cultural conservation all over the world. And this is one of the first grant programs that target specifically linguistic and cultural preservation. We've given, I want to say, several dozen just in the continent of Africa, South America, South and Southeast Asia, Central America as well. I'm not going to go through this now. I think we're, for the sake of time, but I want to talk about, I'm not going to talk about what is DNA, but DNA is sort of a tool that we use to understand the past. And historically, we focused with the Geographic Project on two parts of the DNA we call uniparental. Uniparental means it's inherited by just one parent. And this was how the project started. We now go beyond that, and we actually are working with Helix and using genomic sequence, and that means across the entire genome, all 22 chromosomes in the X and the Y, as well as the mitochondrial DNA, which is the one that's uniparental, inherited only from the mother, and the Y chromosome is also uniparental, inherited only from the father. But now we're studying everything across the entire genome. I want to talk a little bit more about these because this is the results I have so far of genographic participants focus on the Y chromosome, which is inherited through the father. Only men carry it. So women who get the test today unfortunately won't be able to test the Y chromosome, If you ever get a brother, a full brother, or a parent or an uncle participate, then that would be sort of your Y chromosome lineage by default in a sense. The man inherited from the father, grandfather, great-grandfather, it is a direct line of descent. So us men who are standing here carry Y chromosomes of somebody who lived a few hundred years ago, actually really a few thousand, 10,000, 100,000 years ago, almost exactly without a change. And that's the key of it. So looking at the Y chromosome, the male line, and the mitochondrial DNA for the female line, we're looking at a molecule that really hasn't changed over time. And we're looking at that specifically, we can tell a deep, deep history of us as a people and of humanity in general. That's mitochondrial DNA. We study by looking at haplogroups, and if you've taken population genetics courses, or some of the students here might have, you've heard of various different haplogroups. This is sort of the nomenclature we use to categorize the groups of closely related individuals. Closely related to the maternal side will be the mitochondrial haplogroups, and you're closely related to the fraternal side are your Y chromosome haplogroups. So the ones, the African mitochondrial haplogroups, the ones that more commonly found in populations of African or African descent are the L's, L0, L1, L2, L3, L4. And those in Africa, the Y chromosome A and B are very common, and then haplogroup E. And the other letters are found in other parts of the world as well. So I've actually been part of several projects through Genographic carried out in different parts of the world. I showed you a picture from Micronesia, but I've also worked in the Americas, specifically in the Caribbean. I'm from Puerto Rico, and I've conducted field work there several times, going back as far as 2009, 2010, I began a project through Genographic there. Trinidad and St. Vincent, I was involved in a project there on the other side of the Caribbean chain, right up against South America's the island of Trinidad. And slightly just north of there, St. Vincent, which has a connection to Honduras. That Dr. Walker was just talking about, the Garifuna that went to Honduras and trace ancestry sometimes to St. Vincent, small island in the Lesser Antilles. And more recently, I was involved in a project where we sampled 1,000 people in the country of the Dominican Republic. And it was a project that was inspired by actually a government official in the Dominican Republic who read about our work in Puerto Rico and said, I want to do this in my country. And was able to raise money, and we sampled 1,000 people, 40 people in the 25 states, the 25 sort of provinces, and it's one of the most comprehensive single country studies that we've ever done. And we're still publishing it. This is just done in the last couple of years, I'm going back 2 or 3 years. 1,000 participants. It was a partnership between the government, a university there, and National Geographic. And some of the results are just starting to come out now. And this is how we present the results to individuals who participate. We do it by showing your sort of individual geographic makeup. What percent of DNA you have that ties you to certain different parts of the world. That's what we used to do it originally back at Geno 2.0. We only had 9 regions. With the kit now called Geno 2.0 Next Generation, which is the kit that some of you have seen, we can tell you geographic origin across 22 different regions of the world. And that number actually we're looking to keep increasing, getting more specificity. Back in Geno 2.0, unfortunately, when it came to the continent of Africa, we could tell you were sub-Saharan Africa, or maybe you were associated with a small group in South Africa. If you were North African, you seemed to group with Mediterranean. If you were actually of Native American ancestry, you were just Native America, and everything from Alaska to Chile. We were just limiting the whole world to 9 regions. Now we can do it in the 20s. And actually now we can tell you more specifically different regions, about 5 different regions of Africa, which I think is much more informative. But my favorite part is always telling the story of how your ancestors moved from our common origin in Africa and spread throughout the world. I always like to show this slide when I'm talking about the Caribbean, especially the African ancestry in the Caribbean, to show you the diversity of phenotypes. Of all these people carry actually African ancestry in different ways. I actually myself even carry. I've done my DNA and I've shown that I Puerto Rican actually carry percent African as well, even though very fair skinned. But people like Rihanna, Usain Bolt from Jamaica, Shakira from Colombia. These are my collaborators actually. These are not even famous people. This is Jada Venturas who worked with me. She's quite Trinidadian. He's from Costa Rica, my colleague. And this is my colleague from Puerto Rico. Just to show, these are all people from the kind of Caribbean region. Different phenotypes. And in reality, I study in the Caribbean not just the African ancestry, but also the Native American ancestry and the European ancestry.
because people of the Caribbean especially are a mixture of the different groups. And not just genetically, but culturally. And when you're talking about Congo, I'm thinking my favorite drum has always been the conga. And obviously this is an instrument that we play in Puerto Rico, and one of my favorite instruments when I was growing up. Obviously it's an instrument from Africa with the word conga. And it's now found all over the world. And like, I'm not going to spend too much time in this as well, but this is to show slightly how the history changed in the Caribbean region. 1700s, it was so colonized predominantly by Spain with a couple specks of colonization by France, Britain, the Netherlands came in. By 1838, you had these countries rise up against the colonial powers and take their independence, being led by the country of Haiti in the early 1800s, which was a revolution of freed slaves who took the country for themselves. I don't want injustice to the story as well, but in 1779, just 40 years ago, the country, it was just a cycle of completely different countries, their own sovereignty, but their own related and distinct stories. And just to show you some of the results that we've gotten from the project in Puerto Rico. Here I'm only showing the maternal story, and this is actually what I've shown when I've given talks in Puerto Rico to show that when I was a young kid in Puerto Rico, I was told there were no Native Americans left. The Africans were brought over, but really we belong to Spain. We're proud of our mother country, Spain. Europe represents the smallest percentage of genetics in the country of Puerto Rico. This is the slide I can show people. And for the maternal side, indigenous is the largest. And African is consistently about a quarter. But actually Puerto Rico, compared to all the Caribbean islands, this is one of the smallest. When you look at St. Vincent, this is Trinidad, not St. Vincent, I'm sorry. The percentage is in mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line, African component is actually over 60%. European, against relatively small, and the indigenous is quite small. And in the country of Dominican Republic, this is what we're looking to publish now. It's an interesting and yet distinct ratio. About 50% or 45% were African, maybe just maternal. European now being a little higher, because Hispaniola, that was sort of the Caribbean capital for Spain, that's where a lot of slaves were being brought over that were distributed across the Caribbean. They came into the Dominican Republic, and from there went to Puerto Rico or Cuba and other places. Like you were pointing out, like the walk of the places in Central America, South America, the ports in the Dominican Republic were similar in a way. That's where they came in and were distributed. And we're finding high percentage, and it varied across the states in the Dominican Republic. And like I mentioned, we looked at these haplogroups, which are sort of the closely related groups of lineages, L being the letter sign for Africa, and L0 through L4 are the groups. And what we've been able to do over time and much work is look at the distinct haplogroups in these countries, in the Caribbean, and throughout the Americas, and to see where we think the genetic ties in. Like you were doing some of the names and places, we've been able to do something similar as well with these mitochondrial DNA and likewise Y chromosome lineages. L0 is one, L0A for instance, is one quite common in Brazil and parts of the Caribbean, and we think it has ties right to the Portuguese colonies, that used to be Portuguese colonies of Mozambique and Angola. L0 is more common down here. Whereas L3 is more tied to the Congo, and we also see that in Brazil, we see that in the Caribbean. The L1s and L2s seem to be more common in North America, and we see ties there more closely to Western Africa. Some of the percentages, for instance, that I started talking about in Puerto Rico is about 20 to 25% African lineages. We also had a project in Bermuda, where we see about 60 to 65%. St. Vincent is even higher than Trinidad, we're talking 70 to 80% African lineage, and it's a mixture of the L2s and L3s. Nicaragua was a little lower, but still very, very much present. Brazil, the mitochondrial DNA was 30 to 40, but I believe when you look at the other parts of the DNA, it's actually even higher. And we did a study in Philadelphia. I was a postdoc working at the University of Pennsylvania among African Americans in Philadelphia. The percentage of African lineages there were quite high. And L0 was present, but L1s and L2s were slightly higher. But now we've been able to do it with this kit that you see kind of going around, like I mentioned, is our current kit that we run in Helix. It's our processor. With it, you do the complete mitochondrial genome. You get the whole history of your maternal side, and for men, you get one of the most detailed Y chromosome stories as well. And then we look at the rest of your DNA. We tell you the story of all of your ancestors, where they came from, broken down by biogeographical geographical regions. So this is the kind of commercial facing side of genographic. The other parts I showed you were some of our research focus sides. And a couple of results that I want to share with you. So this is a participant of Afro-Brazilian. And it was a mixture, probably about 30% of Western Central Africa, had some Native American and components mostly of Southern Europe. So this is what it looks like when you look at your results personal. This is somebody who's Brazilian, but identified as Afro-Brazilian. But when you look at their mitochondrial DNA, you see the story of an origin most likely in East Africa, with some of the ancestors migrating more towards the Congo region. And that's for the highest frequency of this lineage, which I believe may have been an L3E dimension, is quite common in the Congo area. This is an African American participant, and I'm doing this anonymous because we don't want to sort of portray without having somebody's permission to show the results. This is sort of somebody anonymous I'm showing the African American participants. This is what it looks like on the new kit showing the various regions of Africa. This component about 90% West Africa, a small component of Southern Africa as well, with some mixture in Southern Europe and a little bit of Northwestern Europe. African American participant. His Y chromosome lineage, paternal lineage, is E, the one I mentioned. That's quite common throughout Africa. It's one that we, population geneticists, are kind of confused about because E is found outside of Africa, and it's also more derived or later lineage found back in Africa. This is one story of migration out of Africa and migration back into Africa. These are kind of neat stories that you discover from this by sequencing DNA. And this is a participant that has connections to Southern Africa. And one of the rare moments that you find somebody who's 100% one region, 100% Southern Africa, with the paternal line, one of the oldest one, A1A, I believe, which I think also originates probably in East Africa, terminates. It's probably more common in parts of South Africa now. So anyway, I want to show you a little bit of the research and a little bit about the product, the genographic product that you guys have seen now. And I guess I'll take questions or do a wrap up, move on. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Dr. Villar?
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question. I bought the Geno 1. Can you, did you guys, when you were sequencing it, can you tell the Geno 2 story from the first kit, or do I have to do it over again?
We've updated the stories, but once the DNA was done, it was for once and done.
Okay.
With actually the good thing with working with like Lou and Helix is that your DNA is done and you can always kind of, the DNA is there, basically, it'd be a matter of going back and getting more and more of the information. So the Geno 1 data, back then we just told you your haplogroup. You either picked my Y or my mitochondria. Now with one kit, you can actually get the whole story. So if possible, I encourage you to get another one because you get a more detailed or more complete story now. Yeah. Thank you.
One of the things we're adding to the 1,000 Genomes Project that no other group or no other sequencing group has is wellness counseling. Because you get your results, and then sometimes you want to talk about it. So we have a wellness group that is very interested in just hearing your responses to the DNA results that you have and kind of helping you sort them out. This is particularly important if you're admins.
Right.
You have genes from many different populations, and most of us have genes from many different populations. And kind of figuring out, well, now, who am I? Where do I stand? You know, and who are my people?
And I've had a lot of stories of people who take the test and it's eye-opening. They kind of discover something about themselves they don't know. And I often just sit down with people, go over with the computer, go over the results with them, or go over the phone with them, or over Skype with them the results. And it's just it's neat to be able to offer that. And like I said, the prices have come down significantly, that we can do it much more in more bulk now. In between Geno 1 and the Geno product now, we can actually tell, I think, a more detailed story of populations from Africa. But like you pointed out, we are still lacking a lot of the diversity. As we're doing more in Africa, people continue to do more in Europe, so we're still probably decades away, I think, with catching up with the diversity. We can tell you more about a difference in the sense between somebody in East London and somebody in West London than we can with somebody from Nigeria and somebody from Ethiopia, which is, I think, almost ridiculous, because these are completely different people, very genetically diverse. You're talking 2,000 miles apart across a huge continent, or two people who live on opposite sides of a city in England. So I think we need to do a lot more work to better understand the genetic diversity that I think is in African populations and the African diaspora populations as well. So anyway.
What's the significance, let's say the LO is older than the L1?
Yeah.
What's the significance of oldness? Question one.
Right.
And question two, currently, there are African Americans who say, I found out I'm a Chicana. And my response is always, I hope there more than that.
Right.
So, with respect to African origins, can you tell specific ethnic groups from some areas?
We try to shy away from ethnic groups. We can tell you where, what part of Africa your lineage is more commonly found. If you happen to have something unique, only found in one place, then that's very informative, but that's quite rare as well. I think the more we do, we can be more accurate and more specific. I don't like to say that we'll tell you the moment you take a test how much Yoruba you have, because just the fact is that a lot of Yoruba people have been sequenced, and then we try to compare everybody to them. We need to do a lot more, because we're very lacking in the comparative population. So if we could guess, but I think that's a disservice to people. And to in your first question about the various different numbers and letters, so mitochondrial DNA, which is the L's you were talking about, we did it kind of backwards in the 90s, when people started 90s and early 2000s, people started giving letters, and then after giving all the letters away under all the other alphabet, they were like, the rest of the world, like, oh, we haven't even given any letters to Africa, oh, and letter L is left. And then that's a sad story, but it was sort of like an afterthought to categorize the groups in Africa. And this was in the late 90s and early 2000s. So then they decided to say, well, we'll give L1 will be the oldest, L2 the second oldest, L3 the next oldest. And the difference between L1 and L2 could be 100,000 years. Whereas the difference between an H1 and an H2 is only 10,000 years. So the difference in the lineages in Africa is much larger, because the lineages really have deeper roots in the tree, if that's what makes sense, the deeper branches in the tree. But there's another case where people say, well, we'll get L1, L2, and what happens? They discover an even older one. They had to go back to one and call it L0. But L0 is the one that we see more common in some populations in southern Africa, that we think are some of the earliest branches of the human family tree. Some of the Bushmen, like Kalahari, for instance, they've studied for a long time. They speak with click languages. They're commonly the L0A, L0K, I think L0D. But that's sort of, it was done kind of backwards. And the idea was, yeah, the earlier the letter, the older it is. The earlier the number, the older it is. The letters were done almost haphazardly. So the Y chromosome is a better nomenclature. A and B are the deepest branches, and therefore the first two letters. But then you got to C, and C is the one that you find all over the world. It seems to be the one that may have been associated with early migration of Africa, quick spread throughout the world. D as well, and then E is the one that leaves Africa and seems to come back. So this idea of trying to use the alphabet to trace human history is much more complicated. It doesn't follow a straight line. Humans don't follow a straight line. Anyway.
Great.
Yeah, so this is all very interesting. I'm thinking about after someone takes a genome 20 test, right? And they get their results back. And this sort of falls on Dr. Walker's question about context.
Right.
And you mentioned one of the services that are going to be provided today for people, but I'm thinking, is there a next step in terms of, so you mentioned the path and the path migration out of Africa, but is there a next step in terms of maybe correlating oral history, so the oral history that people have in terms of what they think their origins are with the actual migration paths, and seeing where maybe there's some correspondence or maybe there's something that doesn't correspond very well?
That's a very good question. So as an anthropologist, I value that sort of immensely, and that's sort of what I'm thinking often. And so in general, most of the work that we've done on places in the world, not directly associated with the kit, but some of the work that I led, for instance, in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, is being led by scientists and anthropologists mostly, who are aware of the cultural factors and the oral stories, like you're saying, come into play. And those have informed the results that we give people on the website. We do try to stay true to exactly what the scientists and the anthropologists in most cases have told us about the stories. And that's why often they could sort of be brief. We don't want to say anything incorrect, so we give you like a big summary, usually a paragraph or two explaining your haplogroup or your migration. And then we leave it up to the anthropologists and the papers they publish. So we published going on 85 papers in Geographic. And that's where I can point people saying, if you want to learn more about L0A, let me show you this paper that our scientists did. If you want to learn more about haplogroup E1B or E1A that leaves Africa and comes back, then point to this direction in this paper. So it's sort of a balance. So you want to be able to convey results to people, be truthful, and but we also often don't have the resources to be able to research. Now we're going tens of thousands of different haplogroups that we can write about. So we try to do it justice, and often if people want more information, I can send them towards the anthropological literature line. Yeah.
All right, so my question has to do with the question about 7 indigenous groups in Africa and around the world, right? So if you wanted to, if somebody got their DNA sequenced, how long or how much time do you think will be research before we're able to say this person is from this individual, right? Will we review that? Because I know that nothing biology is very concrete, right? So we want to work in terms of, this is a chance that you are this in this population, right? Are there any specific markers that you can say are from this group, or is that too much around the world to really
Yeah, I think if you happen to have something unique, then and you have enough of a reference database, you may be able to say something with more certainty. What I tell people is often like, if you're this haplogroup or this, your results here could reflect various places. You have people in Nigeria who you match maybe 60% to. You have people in Angola you match 45% to. And I think that's a more scientifically accurate way to do it. And rather than tell you, like, those results mean that you are from this tribe at this moment, I think we could tell somebody that, but then we would be maybe dishonest, we would not know for sure, unless there was something very specific that we could say, one mutation in the world is so unique that you have here, and you can make that connection. So sometimes you have to be a little, for the sake of being correct, be a little less specific, and that encourage people to do more research. Answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I think for African Americans or for New World Africans, because of I like the way Dr. Walker put it, America was a meeting place for Africans from different places. Right. So we are an amalgamation of African peoples. And that's not been emphasized in the scientific literature. In fact, the scientific literature kind of just treats African Americans as a homogeneous lump that then has some admixture with European. But we can change the discourse through our research. You guys feel me on this? We be able to say that we have the data to show that Dr. Guthrie is going to be, a mixture of a whole bunch of different African groups. And Dr. Walker's a different mixture. And, and so it goes on and on like this. And that is more meaningful than saying, you're in your house at this point. But for our brothers and sisters who have recently come to the Americas from Africa, we would expect to provide more African geographical detail. But, people like my ancestry, I've been here, my family has been here since the 1600s. So finding that location in Africa, probably not very likely. But it's all okay. That's the other thing too, is that whatever we are is okay. It's what was intended for us. And we should feel good about it,
Yeah, I just want to add a comment too. Fatima and I lived in Tanzania for 3 years. There's a lot of a mixture among Africans too. tribes that live in similar geographical territories, they marry each other. Human beings will breed. So people who live, who speak a certain language, they marry a woman or a man from another group too. So it's not like, you can find a gene for Yoruba, because those people have been related to other people historically over a long period of time. And one other comment is that I'm really glad that Fatima and Dr. Millar are working together, because one of the problems with the geneticists, I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Nutrition and Food Science at the University of Maryland, and we have a lot of basic scientists that do a lot of stuff, including genetic stuff. But they don't understand the cultural dimension, the historical dimension about how people move. And that greatly enriches the story about our human genome and about our past and about our diseases. And it's not really, I don't really care whether I'm from Europe or wherever. I'm actually L1B and M253 or something like that. But that doesn't really matter to me. But I appreciate that you guys are trying to put this whole human story in a larger context in terms of movement, in terms of health, in terms of disease, and Dr. Lou, it's a very important thing that you're doing, and I hope that people here who have not wanted a kit yet, but you guys can wait some more. You can have your genome tested, and people who are reluctant, overcome your reluctance, because this is it's going to tell our larger story about us. It may not say that I'm, Kamba or Kikuyu or something like that, but it will give me some affinities about health issues, about where my deep ancestry comes from, and things like that. I was shocked to find from my Y chromosome that it goes back 20,000 years ago to Scotland, Germany, and places like that. So when I got the results, I sent to my daughter, who's here. She was at that time doing her master's degree with Mike Hammer. Some of you, I'm sure you guys know Mike Hammer. And I said, is this true? And she said, and Mike Hammer said, what?
He said, it's definitive. It's definitive for our
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you know exactly where you're from, because we've got great specificity where your white chromosome is from.
Yeah. So that's a part of my research.
I don't have to deal with it. Well, that's the only part, right?
Black Scots.
Identity is more than just your genetics, right? And so that's a piece, and you add it to the mix of things that you are. And you have to then reconcile who you think you are, who your identity is, pre-test and post-test, right? And how that extra information either bolsters or changes your perspective of the totality of who you are.
And it does cause some cognitive issues when you get these results back, because of our particular history in the U.S. Many of us want to identify solely with Black people, but when I got that information back, at first, before I thought about it, it was a little bit disconcerting, that I'm thinking, okay, maybe 100 years, 200 years, 300 years ago, there was that whole slave thing, but this test was talking about 23 to 28,000 years ago. I mean, we weren't in this, in this kind of situation. But the point that both of them made before about having some counseling and getting people who understand the genetics and the spread of genetics, as well as psychology counseling, is very important, because it is very disconcerting to me. Unfortunately, my daughter and wife know a lot about this stuff. But getting psychological counseling may be very important too, because I think Fatima's told me that some of the men, especially who see European ancestry, are a little bit concerned, because we African Americans really understand what that means, and we understand it in a real way, in a very visceral way. So, reaching out to psychologists and others who have an understanding of how to contextualize this and how to make us feel better and deal with it is also very important. Sorry. I'm a professor too, so.
Okay, well, one last question, and then we have some food for you. Yes. Yes, sir.
I just want, since I opened the program, close it up. he gets it because it wasn't programmed humanly intellect to function like that. But we're operating in a system over here that's way past our human intelligence. It defies our brain, cerebral, that thing that we call the brain. Because things are being designed and progressing at a level that defies our common human experience. So I open it, I do have to close it up and take everything in context. The way the ancestors are expressing themselves through me and through all of them, because I am their oracle. So are each and every one of us. So when we speak to one another, it's not that accident coincidence that we hear. We hear because of cosmic or divine program. So each one that is here, we have an assignment, whatever that is. So you take it, listen to the professors, and to grow with it, and then to operate on you. And what they have been saying here is something that was given to me. I can say, I don't know how it is. The universe put it in my head, and I don't know how to put it in paper, put it in physical form. So I called a friend of mine. He's an artist. I said, I want a flyer to describe what I do. I do know what I do, or I've been told what I do. I didn't tell him how to do it. Again, the same energy worked on him. He came up with this one, and that describes what is going on here. So here is me drumming. I'm generating energy, and that energy, this is for you. Thank you. You are mayor. We have messed the world up. And then I'm taking it into the political brain. I'm just giving you that look at it as a man, but the people who are really in charge of this program are the women. This is yours. I didn't know it until I came here. I had to go to the guy to discuss this. So what I was told to do is coming into manifestation. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 right there. We the men, we are negligible, but not that we are discounted. So now the world of tomorrow is going to be powered by the women. Because we the men have been incapable of running the world. So call this the Asian system.
No, it's not.
My act.
My art.
Thank you.
Okay. Please go and get something to eat. One second, buddy. Okay, I'm not excited.
If you want to talk about Africa, so we can do all
And when it comes to the
only came about 6 months ago. So those in Europe, 20,000 years, 15,000 years. There were no people in these countries that existed.
Yeah, I think it's part of that. Thank you. And I'm glad to hear that you're still around. No, thank you. Think about it.
I go down to the tomb, and the ancient Egyptians themselves very colored blue, and also a kind of a reddish brown. So that tells you when you talk about dinosaurs, most of us. And that is Arabs and
Always you about thank you so
advertise with the hats.
put the young men on this side.
Oh, you want to put the so you're trying to charge the battery? Oh, okay. Alright, let's put it right here. Alright, let me plug it in. Alright, there it is.
When I was
It's charging.
I met David Tassa from Cuba. And we went to Baba and my wife was actually going to some of the so
My client is like
I enjoyed Let's go outside and get something to eat. Enjoyed your presentation. Thank you for helping Howard University and helping Dr.
I'm just curious.
No,
because see, I don't want to have a fight. Well, next time I hear he's coming around, I'll let you know for sure.
yes, I do. Yes. Yeah. And I'm sure they don't want to split it. So we just have to expand the yeah. But that's, yeah, because we have, yeah, I mean, we don't what you get us, but that's
I don't have to speak.
I know, because someone said, now the genetic system is people who don't like it all. And it's a
Alright, so real quick, we have one last giveaway for people who are still here.
But thank you. You did a great job. Yes.
Janet Jones. Jacinth Jones. Are you Jacinth? Or Janet?
Some results, we're starting to get them back. No, they'll come directly to that person. If they register in the field, so they're not, it's like, so they register their kit.
Jalen Biggie?
Did you? We'll get it.
Jalen, what's your last name?
But,
You Jalen? Oh, come on, girl. Oh my God. Easy.
I never did understand you. I don't think you have to. Those numbers are related to the it's not the same number. I don't quite understand. I should have asked he's gone. I should have asked him, how did that go? Right. You know what, I'll send him an email. And ask him, I said, he was always messing us up. Yeah.
So Jalen and just two J's, that's it. Ready to get Dr. Queen?
I want to get some good. Okay, all right.
I could have done that.
I thought the camera was here.
Are you fine? Wait. Never mind. I give you it either, and I wouldn't give you the presentation, and it was cool. No, I was gonna ask you about it. Class. It's a research thing where they're doing study abroad. Oh, that's cool.
You guys gotta do a common research lab.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you trying to do? Are you trying to go into it?
Crap, I forgot to end the stream.
Oh, that's fine.